Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
A team of investigators raided 9 massage businesses in the Baton Rouge area and detained 10 Chinese women following a months-long investigation. According to the East Baton Rouge
Politics makes for strange bedfellows, and so do mass deportations. Why are the protests, however modest and noisy they are against the law, even being held? Well, it's because, as a lot of these people saw it, they had gotten away with something. That's what illegal immigration taught people after 50 plus years of not enforcing the law. The law doesn't matter, nobody minds. Well, it turns out somebody did. With foundational black Americans in particular sitting this one out, what's happened is you have people who apparently have decided that they're going to try to lock arms with each other. But that hasn't been having very much effect, and the reason why is twofold. One, there's simply not enough of them to make a big difference like that, and two, they don't come from a tradition of doing this. We're steeped in this tradition. It's part of who we are because we've been the ones doing all the heavy lifting. Everybody else has been sitting back while we've done all the work. So when they try to get out there and call themselves doing it, it just doesn't have the same heft. On top of that, if you have groups who are not used to having to actually be allies with anyone, they've instead been enjoying being opportunists, well, when it comes time for them to actually have to practice allyship, they're dysfunctional on that one too. It just goes to show there is no substitute for the moral legitimacy or institutional knowledge that we represent. You saw the video that I started off this morning's briefing with, and frankly, I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you, that so many of these so-called massage parlors have actually been nothing more than clumsy fronts for prostitution. And I'm not sure why it took months for ICE agents to figure that one out. I have to wonder, how many trips did they make to that place before they finally realized, hey, the extra service the girls are giving, it wasn't some accident the first time, or the third, or the fifth. I guess they needed months and months of research. And of course, if you're a black woman, you probably noticed that it's taking a lot longer to get your nail and your hair done at these Asian nail salons. ICE has been visiting them too. A number of these places are also used as fronts to launder money. ICE aren't the only ones who ought to be paying these places a visit. The IRS ought to come through as well. If you didn't know better, you'd swear that you had some sort of organized crime behind it, because these are the kind of things that the Chinese government likes to export to the world. They like to set up their little outpost, and you got these folks who come in, and the Chinese Communist government's basically pulling the strings, or some form of organized crime from these areas. So for the Latino activists who have spent the last few months saying that the orange man is singling them out, well, as it turns out, he didn't want them to feel like they were alone, so he's been collecting some other people as well. And a couple of the stories have basically been saying that the Asian and Hispanic communities have been trying to come together to protest these ICE deportation raids. We'll see how effective that is. But for the people who are still at this late date demanding to know why it is that black Americans are not putting on the cape, it's because of the fact that too many of the immigrants who have come to the United States have been by and large anti-black racist. And this didn't just happen in the last few years, it's been going on the entire time. There's way too many tethers coming in from Africa and the Caribbean as well, bringing an anti-FBA attitude with themselves. And the tethers are particularly egregious because they make the solid immigrant brothers and sisters look terrible. So truth be told, everyone should be applauding these raids that are taking place because it's been long overdue. Now, for those who do feel that the orange man is singling out the Asian community, what I would recommend is that the Asians should hire lawyers. They could start by asking Ed Blum if some of those lawyers that his mega-millionaire donors paid for his nuisance suits falsely claiming racial discrimination are still on retainer somewhere, because he claimed that he was doing all of that because he was going to be helping Asian students, but as it turned out, Blum's lawyers never actually pursued litigation that was pro-Asian. It was all only anti-black. His lawyers only filed suits if they think that they can attack black people. They don't care what happens to Asians, and this is the proof. Because here they are wondering where's Ed Blum at, where's their buddy at, because they locked arms with him, and now he's left them out in the cold. Well, there's always plan B. See if the folks who marched for Peter Liang are willing to pony up some money, but if history is any guide, they're not going to contribute one thin dime. And while there are people who have been putting on a brave face and trying to say basically they don't care about this, that's not true at all. Because of how widespread this issue is, a lot of these people who are trying to pretend as if, we're basically not bothered by this, they're quaking in their boots. The problem is there's been people who thought they had found a comfortable place under white supremacy. And for a little while, apparently the dominant society was content to let them believe that, but they knew that they better not buck the system. So when someone like, say, a Vincent Chin is killed, there would not and would never be coast-to-coast demonstrations because people understood that he was killed by members of the dominant society. You better not make any noise. And the dominant society knew this too. So that's the reason why, even at this late date, there's all of this reticence and hesitance and confusion. It's because when you got people who basically have had two applications out there, one in case white power can maintain its authority and the other in case it collapses, well, when you try to hedge your bets, especially with a house of cards, sooner or later the challenge we pose to white supremacy will force the bootlick shills and wannabe members of the oppressor class to have to make a choice. You can't stay on the fence forever, but of course, they already made their decision a long time ago. So it's far too late to turn back now. That's the reason why when you look at Los Angeles, you still got some people milling around downtown claiming that they're having a protest. But they just don't seem to realize the contradiction of claiming to be Americans while at the same time waving nothing but Mexican flags. You can't in one breath say that Mexico isn't your home, and then at the exact same next moment, you're waving the Mexican flag and talking about Viva la Raza, etc. This is what you call counterproductive protesting. You might as well be standing in front of your own mirror and arguing against yourself. For all the people who have been advocating for illegal aliens, claiming that they're no different than any other American, this flies in the face of all of that. And that's the reason that the ice-cold roundup of 2025 is going to continue. And the attempts by the allies of the illegal aliens to make it seem like the whole country is behind them is failing. They've gone so far as to mix their so-called No Kings protests with the gay pride parties taking place in Boston. This is what happens when your movement isn't organic, when it's astroturf, when it's being paid for by a few white Democrat dark money donors. And it's plain to see they didn't pay enough people to show up for their protests. What the country has been looking for is a reset of some sort. The anti-black racism from Latin America and from Asia has to stop. And until they learn to drop that mess, a reset is going to have to be required. Democrats right now are frozen with indecision. The optics of all this are terrible for them. And it's summer now, so we're going into the slow period when Congress session ends next month. The problem for Democrats is that they want illegal aliens to be allowed to stay because the path to citizenship is critical to Democrats establishing their new would-be political base, one that will no longer be reliant or rather vulnerable to black voters and our demands. When racist Rahm Emanuel was talking about what he called Biden Republicans, don't you know that also included people from Latin America too? Countries where the pro-capitalist rhetoric from the white right will play better due to the history of socialist governments that they've had there in the past. And also, the well-known and deeply ingrained and violent culture of anti-black racism is also part of the social fabric down there too. That's why there's been a number of people in the Democratic Party who have felt that with the Democrats trying to pivot to the right, actually they pivoted 30 years ago with Bill Clinton. Far as they're concerned, it's time for them to scoop up some more voters who might be more susceptible to that kind of political leaning. Democrats want to distance themselves from the loud and noisy antics of their new would-be base, but at the same time, they can't afford to punish them with deportation because they need a political counter-lever to black voters. That's what this is all about. Their so-called No Kings protests, this is nothing more than a clumsy front for the DNC's 2026 midterm voter outreach. That's what it is. They're trying to see if they can manufacture the kind of genuine, authentic energy that was going on during the 2020 uprisings. But of course, as I've shown you with Jim Clyburn and people like Jim Himes and others, these people do not want the actual black demands for justice that went along with the 2020 uprisings. They can't deny the fact that Democrats were swept to power on that wave, but they're like, that was winning the wrong way. We need to win without actually doing anything, especially for black people. We definitely got to make sure black people get nothing. So when they talk about no kings, what that actually means is no results from the Democrats. That's what it actually should be called. We figured out a long time ago that there's no point in expecting people who aspire to be honorary members of the oppressor class to ever stop that aspiration. When people have brown skin but insist on identifying as white on everything from driver's licenses to employment applications, and when people choose to fully embrace a narrative like model minority, this is what people are talking about when they use terms like white adjacent. And we've seen these terms coming even from a handful of people within both the Asian and Hispanic communities, talking about exactly the kind of vulnerability that this leaves them open to. So the ideology, goals, and anti-black racism for the dominant society also becomes theirs in many cases. And why not? For the longest time, white supremacy made it a point to leapfrog every group of immigrants over black Americans in order to manufacture and maintain an artificial racial hierarchy that's been based on depriving black Americans of not just the fruits of our own labors, but also to systematically lock us out of whatever opportunities there are which are open to everyone else. Opportunities that wouldn't even exist were it not for us. And the people who have been the direct and indirect beneficiaries of all of these anti-black policies, they've known it. Nobody has been fooled about it. Everybody knows the rules of racism. That's the reason why so many people, many of whom haven't even set foot in the United States, already know exactly what it is that they have to do if they want to get into the good graces of the dominant society. They know before they even get here, because white supremacy is global. So the people who are calling themselves protesting these ICE raids, they really don't have a leg to stand on, unless they're going to get out there and tell the very same dominant society that's cheering on these mass deportations that, hey, look at our work ethic, and we're not like these black people over here. If they actually think that's going to work, that's what they should be saying. And the reason why is a majority of the racists in the illegal immigrant community, they've been saying that the entire time. So don't stop now. Go ahead and keep saying it to them. Say that to the ICE agents. Say, oh, we're not like those black folks over there. You shouldn't be doing it. You should be leaving us alone. But I don't think anybody has any illusions that this is going to lead to a meaningful change. This is not going to lead to people finally having their eyes opened, knocking off the anti-black racism, and getting on code against white supremacy. That's not going to happen. We have to be honest about that. What can happen, however, is that people actually have to face the reality and the consequences that go along with playing footsie with white supremacy. White supremacy is not looking for any sort of adjacence. And if there are people who think to themselves that anti-black racism alone is some sort of tide that's going to bind them all together, it's going to be some sort of permanent ground of commonality, well, what they're finding out is simply hating black people isn't enough. It's certainly not enough to get the dominant society to forget what color these other groups actually are, because that's what's happening here. And that's the reason why you're not seeing anybody taking to the parapets and saying, we got to stop this and we got to vote these people out of office. It's not resulting in some political groundswell. The mass deportations are not resulting in mass protests. They're not resulting in any sort of mass movements. In fact, what's happened is people have been looking and going, you know what? The orange man has a point. And that's probably what scares and bothers people the most. Because when you've had 50 plus years of being allowed to believe whatever you want to believe, you start to think that reality is whatever you want it to be, especially when you got white supremacy handing you some crumbs. But sooner or later, white supremacy always gets tired of having to play the game, because the dominant society loves a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. They snicker under their breath, and they love to go ahead and mock their intended targets right before they find the perfect spot to plunge that knife into your back. See, you had a lot of these people, these immigrants, who actually believed the white media propaganda about, oh, look at these hard-working immigrants and their nail shops and their charming little taco trucks and all the rest of that. Oh, these immigrant success stories. Man, they could care less about that. This is what the game has always been from day one. Black people in America were not confused on this. Some of these other groups, they were confused, but they're getting a lot of clarity now. We'll see if it sticks, but even if they don't like what's going on, my recommendation would be, why don't they go to the very forces that they've been locking arms with for the last 4 or 5 generations and ask them to call off the dogs, because it's their dogs that are biting them to begin with. Go ahead and tell them about how important it is to maintain the racial status quo and how they've been good foot soldiers in the war to maintain racial hierarchy, and see if that's enough to get them to stop. Though I gotta tell you, a lot of these people who thought that they had made friends with these white supremacists, they're going to be making their petitions and their pleas for mercy from a different country altogether. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Cloudwalker Z, William, Bobby Ross, Starlet Thompson, and Rebellious Zoe. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.